Hi guys, it's Kirsty. In today's video, I want to talk about the way that anything can become compulsive if it's done to immediately eliminate uncomfortable feelings. So anything that we may do repeatedly to neutralize the obsessions that are coming up or to get rid of the unwanted thoughts, feelings, sensations can actually become compulsive. But before I go into that, I would like to ask, please do subscribe by clicking on the subscribe button below in order to stay up to date with new videos as they're released. So I wanted to discuss this because this is definitely something that came up on my OCD recovery journey. I would find myself unknowingly performing compulsions in order to get rid of uncomfortable sensations, but not realizing that they're a compulsion because it's not necessarily always things that would be so obvious and quite as well known as, some of the compulsions that might be, avoiding certain things, hiding certain objects that bring up our obsessions, or avoiding certain people that bring up our obsessions. Or even though these things are not quite so well known, even more kind of spoken about mental compulsions such as rumination or mental rituals. Once we learn about OCD and various different compulsions, we learn about the mental compulsions as well. But what we don't actually realise is that there might be other more subtle things that we find ourselves doing that have become compulsive. So I want to talk about some of the things that I did on my recovery journey, why I did them, and talk about give some advice from my own experience, how we can begin to identify and tackle these compulsions as well. So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about that I found becoming compulsive unknowingly on my recovery journey was my compulsive note-taking. I did this when I was first seeing a therapist, when I was first seeking help for OCD. I've spoken about this in other videos. I did more psychodynamic therapy rather than CBT. So while it was helpful for some other things, it wasn't quite so great for symptom relief for my OCD recovery. But this was something that I took into my work once I started working with OCD recovery, and we identified this and some of the fears behind it and started to reduce this, and it was note-taking. So my reasons for this is because I wanted to make sure that I got everything out of my sessions, whether that was with my previous therapist or whether that was with Rob, who from OCD recovery. And this was essentially done if we start to dig deeper in order to eliminate any uncertainty, to make sure that I haven't misunderstood anything that was said in my sessions, that I didn't forget anything that was said in my sessions, basically to eliminate any doubt of me getting the most out of my sessions. So here if you look into that, what was I afraid of here? So it was obviously the compulsion was in order to make sure I was doing my recovery journey right, which may suggest that I was afraid of not recovering properly or not recovering right. So it was a case then of kind of looking at the fear of not getting recovery right and not recovering that I had to kind of dig deeper into. And we've got various videos about this on this channel, and we refer to it as fear of fear. So essentially it's afraid of the feelings of being afraid and afraid of OCD itself, essentially, or anxiety itself. So then you can start identifying irrational beliefs that you might hold around that, that you think it's awful and it's intolerable, and you can start challenging these irrational beliefs. And again, there are various videos on this channel about identifying irrational beliefs and challenging them to be more rational beliefs. So I recommend checking out those videos. So that was the first thing that I did that I realized had become compulsive. And along those lines, something else that I did that had become compulsive was kind of a form of journaling for me. So I'd heard that it can be useful to talk about, to jot down, when you've had bad days, and identify, to identify compulsions that you might be doing. Ironically, to make your OCD worse perhaps on those particularly bad days, or to identify triggers. So I took that journaling to a bit of an extreme. I wrote in explicit detail, day in, day out, maybe even jotting down various thoughts that I'd had throughout the day. And also I did it with a view so that I could look back on good days when I was having bad days and remind myself. So that can actually be very useful. But I started to do it compulsively because when I was having a bad day, I did it to reassure myself that I was getting better and that it was just a bad day and that my OCD wasn't getting really, really bad and I could have better days. So it became, because of the frequency with which I was doing it and at times urgency, I realised that I was doing this compulsively. So I started to cut down on the amount of journaling I was doing and kind of tracking of my recovery journey, and tried to be a bit sort of accept it as being a bit more of a fluid thing rather than having a set thing that I was having to write down, and then I would go back and look at it if I was having a particularly bad day, or look at the exact details of a good day and what I did, because clearly I was doing this to eliminate the discomfort that I was experiencing on bad days, and also to eliminate any uncertainty of, exactly what I was, doing to make my OCD worse on bad days, and the good things that I was doing on good days. So it was very much becoming almost like an over control behavior. So, and this is very much not me saying that journaling is a bad thing or anything like that. I'm just giving this as an example for me because of some of the fears that I had driving my OCD. This became compulsive because I was terrified of not getting better, and I started using this as a compulsive way to over control my recovery and know exactly what was triggering me on bad days, and try and basically lock down perfect recovery, which essentially was similar to some of my note-taking, my excessive compulsive note-taking as well. Something else that I found became compulsive for me, and I believe driven by the same fears as my journaling and note-taking, driven by the fear of not getting better, not doing recovery right, etc., staying stuck, was that I found myself almost compulsively working on my recovery. So I found myself initially when I was working with a therapist, when I was doing my psychodynamic therapy, with some of the small amounts of CBT work we did work on, for example, challenging thoughts and thought restructuring, I would work on that compulsively. So when I had a thought, an intrusive thought, I would start trying to do the thought restructuring process that you learn with some types of CBT. So I did that compulsively, and I would also, after spending a very long day at work, I would spend quite a long time in the evening doing this, and I kind of ended up bringing these behaviours into my recovery work that I did with Rob in OCD recovery, which was my recovery work that I did was more specifically for my OCD, that was more appropriate for my OCD. So, working on my exposures and working on some of my rational beliefs rather than going, rather than disputing thoughts, I was disputing beliefs instead, which is the right thing to do. I was kind of finding myself I started to do that compulsively as well. So I would find myself, after I started doing some exposure and started feeling some relief from my OCD symptoms, I then found myself scrambling around trying to find the next exposure that would help to get me even more unstuck. And another thing that I did was, once I learned about REBT, rational emotive behavioural therapy, that we talk about on this channel, which was very helpful for me in my OCD recovery, and disputing irrational beliefs, I started to, the minute I had a thought, I would jump on it immediately, trying to dispute the beliefs behind it as soon as I had the thought, which actually became compulsive because it was done in order to immediately eradicate the uncomfortable feelings that I was feeling as a result of the thoughts. When in fact, the correct way to have gone about this would have been to feel the uncomfortable feelings and still do what I want to do anyway, and try not to interact with the thought as best I can, as is the general kind of consensus in terms of approaching intrusive thoughts, and then save my disputing work to do in a set time during the day so that you're not overreacting with the thoughts and so that it doesn't compulsive. So I started to realise that I was doing this after a while, and essentially I realised that I was trying to force unconditional acceptance rather than working on it as a gradual process, because, you know, obviously when we're trying to shift beliefs that we've formed over a lifetime, it can take time, and I wasn't being patient with the process. So essentially, as I started to learn more and more about, you know, recovery work and some of the things that I could do that might bring me relief, and as I started to work on my recovery and feel a bit more relief and gradually get a little bit more unstuck, and having, you know, my good minutes started to increase and my good hours starting to increase, and maybe my good days, and then maybe I'd have more than one good day per week, and then maybe I'd have 2 to 3 good days in a row, and it would increase. But I would find myself, you know, maybe trying to lock down recovery, eradicate any kind of uncertainty about how I was doing recovery, you know, right, and just try going really, really hard and trying to force acceptance, find out all the next exposures that I could be doing, and basically trying to get the hell rid of OCD ASAP, to get the hell rid of that discomfort, which is understandable because OCD is bloody uncomfortable. But of course, part of OCD recovery is learning to tolerate that discomfort. It's learning to be feel the discomfort of uncertainty, and through that gradually become more comfortable with uncertainty. It's learning to kind of tolerate uncomfortable thoughts, feelings, sensations, and not make overarching kind of judgments about what it all means, and etc. And it is a gradual process. It's up and down, and we know, you know, it can't be rushed, because OCD knows that we want the hell rid. So this is what I started to learn over time, was to identify the behaviours that I might be doing in order to get rid of the uncomfortable sensations in the moment. And I want, you know, in terms of tips to identify what you know, are you doing subtle compulsions? It's asking yourself, what is the purpose of what I'm doing right now? And if that's to eradicate uncertainty in the moment, and if it's done with a sense of urgency, it's likely to be compulsive. And you can, if you try to, you know, stop doing that, or take a break from doing that, or delay doing that, and it gradually sort of temporarily increases your discomfort, that's how you know. And if you can just learn to sit with that discomfort for a bit longer, you know, you'll see that you were perhaps doing compulsions that you didn't realize that you were doing. So those were some of the examples. And another last thing that I wanted to mention also is that when I first started to, my OCD was at its worst, while I was waiting patiently waiting for my medication to kick in, I was compulsively Googling about how long it takes a medication to kick in and what symptoms you'd start to drop. So that was something that was compulsive for me as well. I've spoken on this channel several times about my compulsive Googling about everything and anything. Another thing was compulsive research about OCD for me as well. Which, you know, we do need to learn learn about what we're dealing with. So a degree of research is useful, particularly when it comes to learning about the recovery work. So it is useful, but if you're finding yourself doing it with a sense of urgency, and you're, you know, watching videos, reading stuff constantly, it might be that you need to take a break from it, that it's become slightly compulsive. Something that I did, also, I started to learn about mindfulness as a tool for mental health difficulty recovery. And while I was waiting for treatment, waiting for my medication to kick in, I started to try and meditate several times a day for quite a long time. And I realized that I was trying to do that compulsively as well to eliminate the discomfort that I was feeling. So that was something else that I did. So I hope this video has been useful in terms of talking about how various things can very easily become compulsive. Don't fear, because you can identify these compulsions by, you know, seeing that you're doing it to eradicate discomfort in the moment. You can you can experiment with yourself to see, you know, delaying it. And as I say, taking breaks from it as well, and seeing how uncomfortable you might feel. Don't beat yourself up also, because, you know, why wouldn't we try and eliminate the discomfort that we feel? It's human nature. You know, I do believe I've read our brains are wired to seek pleasure and eliminate pain. And let's face it, OCD, while we're in the thick of it, it causes us pain and suffering. So why wouldn't we seek relief for that? So don't beat yourself up over it, but it's something to keep an eye on if you find yourself doing something in the heat of the moment to try and neutralize or get obsessions or get rid of discomfort, that maybe consider that it might be something that's become compulsive, even if it is to do with your recovery, even if it's something that you were doing that was originally helpful to you, maybe it's become a bit more compulsive now. So it's just something to consider, food for thought. But thank you ever so much for watching this video, and do take care. Bye.